In the next few minutes, you're going to learn 7 responses that will make you impossible to rattle. Not clever comebacks, not manipulation tactics. 7 philosophically grounded positions, tested over 2,000 years, that let you walk into any confrontation, any criticism, any attempt to destabilize you, and come out completely intact. Because here's what nobody teaches you about difficult conversations. The person who loses is never the one who says the wrong thing. It's the one who reacts before they think. The Stoics called it being conquered without a sword, defeated not by what someone said, but by your own unguarded response to it. That ends today. 7 responses, each one a weapon, each one yours by the end of this video. Let's begin. 3 words, that's all. And I guarantee your first instinct is that saying them makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you untouchable. Here's what's actually happening when someone challenges you aggressively. They're not after the truth. They're after your ego. They want you defensive, rigid, contracted, fighting to protect your position. Because a person fighting to protect their ego is predictable, manageable, ultimately weak. They've done this before. They know exactly how it ends. You get louder, they get louder. Nobody learns anything. And the person who loses their composure first loses everything. That's the trap. And most people walk straight into it every single time. But when you say, I may be wrong, genuinely, calmly, without performance, you remove the target they were aiming at. You give them nothing to push against. And you signal something that unsettles every aggressor at a fundamental level. I am not afraid of being wrong, which means I am not afraid of you. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of legions, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote this in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone to read. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. He wasn't performing humility for an audience. He was practicing one of the most demanding disciplines in Stoic philosophy. The recognition that your perception is always partial, always filtered through ego, always shaped by what you want to be true rather than what actually is. The Stoics had a word for the mental faculty that generates false certainty. They called it phantasia. The impression, the automatic story your mind constructs around every event before reason, has had a chance to examine it. And they taught relentlessly that untested impressions are the source of almost all human error. Every argument you've ever had that you later regretted started with an untested impression you were too proud to question. Every relationship damaged by words spoken in certainty that turned out to be wrong started the same way. Here's the Stoic principle that makes this response so powerful. When you affiliate with truth rather than with ego, you become genuinely undefeatable, because you've already agreed to surrender anything that isn't accurate. There's nothing left to take from you. Think about someone in your life right now who consistently makes you defensive. Now ask yourself, what would actually happen if the next time they challenged you, your first internal question was, could they be right? Not as defeat, not as surrender, as philosophy, as the radical, counterintuitive, deeply Stoic decision to care more about being accurate than about being seen as right. Because here's what I've observed consistently in people who practice this. They almost never lose arguments, not because they fight harder, because they fight differently. They fight toward truth instead of toward victory. And truth, unlike victory, is something both people in a conversation can share. That's what I may be wrong actually offers. Not a weakness, not capitulation. An invitation to a completely different kind of conversation. One where nobody has to lose, because nobody came to win. Next, the response that requires 0 words, and is somehow the most powerful of all 7. What if the most powerful thing you could say was nothing at all? Not nothing because you have no answer. Nothing because you've looked at what was just said, evaluated it fully, and decided it simply doesn't deserve a response. That's not weakness. That is one of the most sophisticated positions available to a human being in conflict. Here's what most people don't understand about verbal attacks. Every provocation is a request, a demand, really, for your energy, your fear, your scrambling justifications, your defensive explanations, your emotional reaction that proves to everyone watching that the words found their mark. That energy transaction is the entire point. And silence, chosen, deliberate, stoic silence, starves it completely. But I need to be precise here because there are several kinds of silence, and only one of them is what we're talking about. There's the silence of someone who has nothing to say. That's emptiness. There's the silence of someone who is fuming internally while performing calm externally. That's suppression. And it will explode later in ways you won't be able to control. And then there's stoic silence. The silence of someone who has genuinely processed what was said, found it insufficient to require a response, and chosen, consciously, freely, to withhold their voice. That silence has a different quality. People feel it, even when they can't name what they're feeling. Marcus Aurelius practiced what the Stoics called prosoche, constant, vigilant self-attention. Part of that practice involved noticing the impulse to respond immediately, to fill every silence with self-defense, to prove in real time that the words didn't land, and then asking, does this moment require my voice or my presence? Those are 2 completely different things. Your presence, calm, grounded, unbothered, communicates more than any sentence you could construct in the heat of that moment. Here's what stoic silence actually communicates to the person who just tried to destabilize you. It communicates that their words didn't reach anything worth defending. Not because you have nothing inside, but because what you have inside isn't available for that kind of transaction. Think about the most genuinely powerful person you've ever encountered. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, the one who had something quiet and immovable about them. I'll bet they were not someone who rushed to fill every silence, not someone who felt compelled to justify themselves to everyone who questioned them. The ancient world had a specific term for this quality. They called it megalopsychia, greatness of soul, and it was identified specifically, with the ability to remain unmoved when lesser people expected movement. Here's the practical truth that makes this the most immediately applicable of all 7 responses. When you react immediately and emotionally, you show someone exactly which buttons work. You hand them a map of your vulnerabilities, and they will use that map again. But when you meet provocation with measured silence, or the briefest, calmest possible acknowledgement, you reveal nothing. You remain, as the Stoics would say, free. Now I want to address the discomfort that comes with this, because it's real and it's worth naming. Silence feels dangerous. It feels like people will interpret it as having nothing to say, as being caught off guard, as losing. That discomfort is your ego talking. And your ego, as the Stoics would tell you, is the least reliable advisor you have in high-stakes moments. The person who breaks the silence first in a tense exchange almost always does so from weakness, from the inability to tolerate the pressure of not having spoken yet. Don't be that person. Let the silence exist. Let it stretch. Let it do its work. Because here's what happens in that silence. For you, not for them. You get to think. Actually think. Not react. Not perform. Not scramble. Think. Clearly. From a position of complete interior stability. And when you do eventually speak, if you speak at all, what comes out will be something entirely different from what would have come out in the first 3 seconds. It will be considered, precise, chosen, not fired, aimed. Some of the most powerful people I've ever observed had almost nothing in common, except this. When challenged, they did not rush to speak. The silence was the answer. Next. What to say when silence isn't enough, but agreement isn't possible. The 3 words that create an invisible firewall between you and anyone trying to pull you into their chaos. Here's a situation I want you to recognize. Someone says something to you that is wrong, possibly offensive, maybe genuinely harmful in its assumptions about you. And you have 2 options that feel available. Agree, which violates your integrity, or disagree, which starts a fight you didn't want and probably won't win cleanly. Most people pick one of those 2, and both of them cost something. There is a third option, one that costs you nothing, concedes nothing, and simultaneously closes every door the other person was trying to walk through. 4 words, that's an interesting perspective. Now, before you dismiss this as passive or evasive, I need you to understand what this response actually does at a philosophical level. Because on the surface it sounds like nothing, like a polite way of changing the subject. It isn't. It's a precision instrument. Here's what it does not say. It does not say you agree. It does not say you disagree. It does not validate their position or attack it. It takes no stance whatsoever on whether what they said is right or wrong, wise or foolish, worth engaging with or beneath consideration. What it does say is this. I have heard you. I have registered the existence of your view, and I am choosing deliberately, freely, not to make it my problem. Epictetus opened his entire handbook of Stoic practice, the Enchiridion, with a single distinction that underlies everything we're discussing today. Some things are in our control, and others are not. Other people's opinions, their judgments, their certainties, their need to have you agree with their version of reality fall entirely in the second category. That's an interesting perspective, is the linguistic expression of that distinction made real in conversation. The Stoics were fascinated by a phenomenon they called sympatheia, the deep interconnectedness of all things. But they were equally concerned with its shadow side, the way we unconsciously absorb other people's emotional states, their anxieties, their certainties, their anger. You felt this. Someone walks into a room furious, and within minutes you're irritated too, without knowing exactly why. Someone challenges you with absolute certainty, and suddenly you feel the pressure to match their certainty, to defend your position with the same heat they're bringing. That absorption is what the Stoics called path, the disturbances that come not from within, but from without. That's an interesting perspective, is a firewall against pate. It creates what Epictetus called diastema, distance, interval, space between the impression and the response, between what they said and what it does to you. But here's where I need to be completely honest with you, because the Stoics had no patience for performance. This response only carries the power I'm describing when you actually mean it. If you say that's an interesting perspective while internally seething, while cataloging everything wrong with what they just said, while waiting for your turn to dismantle them, you've learned the words, you've missed the philosophy entirely. The point is to genuinely position yourself as someone who finds the diversity of human opinion interesting rather than threatening. And I know how that sounds. Easier said than done when someone is attacking you directly. So here's the reframe that makes it possible. Every person who says something you find wrong or offensive arrived at that position through a process, a history, a set of experiences and wounds and beliefs that you may know nothing about. They are not your enemy. They are a human being who sees the world differently than you do. And this is and the fact that they see it differently, that is genuinely interesting, if you let it be. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He was surrounded by people whose opinions he found wrong, whose behavior he found troubling, whose politics he found corrosive. And yet, he wrote in his private journal exercises in genuine curiosity about what drove those people. What combination of nature and experience produced this particular human being with these particular views. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people you deal with today will be difficult, ungrateful, arrogant, but recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to your own." He didn't say tolerate wrongdoing. He said, find it genuinely interesting that people arrive at such different places from the same starting point. That's an interesting perspective means when a Stoic says it. Not dismissal, not sarcasm, not a polished way of ending a conversation you don't want to have. Genuine curiosity, real distance, the freedom of someone who has decided, consciously, philosophically, that other people's certainties are not their emergency. Here's where this becomes practically transformative in your daily life. Think about the conversations that have cost you the most, the ones that derailed your day, damaged a relationship, left you saying things you couldn't take back. How many of them started because you felt compelled to correct someone's perspective? Not because correcting them would have changed anything meaningful, but because their being wrong felt like a threat to something inside you. That feeling, that urgency to be seen as right, is what that's an interesting perspective dissolves. Not because the other person's view suddenly becomes valid, but because your peace stops depending on whether they hold it. Next, what to say when you genuinely need time. When the pressure to respond immediately is the trap itself. And the 4 words that turn delay from weakness into one of the most sophisticated signals of intelligence you can send. And this is and the fact that they see it differently, that is genuinely interesting, if you let it be. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He was surrounded by people whose opinions he found wrong, whose behavior he found troubling, whose politics he found corrosive. And yet, he wrote in his private journal exercises in genuine curiosity about what drove those people. What combination of nature and experience produced this particular human being with these particular views. He wrote, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself the people you deal with today will be difficult, ungrateful, arrogant, but recognize that the wrongdoer has a nature related to your own. He didn't say tolerate wrongdoing. He said, find it genuinely interesting that people arrive at such different places from the same starting point. That's an interesting perspective means when a Stoic says it. Not dismissal, not sarcasm, not a polished way of ending a conversation you don't want to have. genuine curiosity, real distance, the freedom of someone who has decided, consciously, philosophically, that other people's certainties are not their emergency. Here's where this becomes practically transformative in your daily life. Think about the conversations that have cost you the most, the ones that derailed your day, damaged a relationship, left you saying things you couldn't take back. How many of them started because you felt compelled to correct someone's perspective? Not because correcting them would have changed anything meaningful, but because their being wrong felt like a threat to something inside you. That feeling, that urgency to be seen as right, is what "that's an interesting perspective" dissolves. Not because the other person's view suddenly becomes valid, but because your peace stops depending on whether they hold it. Next, what to say when you genuinely need time. When the pressure to respond immediately is the trap itself. And the 4 words that turn delay from weakness into one of the most sophisticated signals of intelligence you can send. Third, and this is the subtlest Stoic point, it builds what Marcus Aurelius called hypomone, patient endurance. The ability to sit in the discomfort of not having an answer yet, without needing to escape that discomfort with noise. That capacity to tolerate the open question is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can develop. Because most of the damage done in difficult conversations happens in the gap between the provocation and the response. In the 2 seconds where ego overrules reason and says something that takes 2 weeks to repair. Let me think about it that closes that gap, deliberately, philosophically, with full awareness of what it's doing and why. Here's your practice. The next time you feel the pull to respond immediately, to prove you are already prepared, to fill the silence before it becomes uncomfortable, pause, say the 4 words, mean them, and then actually think. Not about how to win, about what's actually true. That single shift from performing intelligence to practicing it will change the quality of every difficult conversation you have from this point forward. Next, the response that looks like agreement but is actually something far more powerful. The 5 words that disarm opposition without surrendering a single inch of your actual position. Notice the difference between this and response 1. Response 1 was, I may be wrong, an inward acknowledgement of your own fallibility, a recognition that your perception might be incomplete. This one is different, more demanding, more exposed. You might be right as the outward expression of something far harder, genuine openness to the other person's position. And before your ego immediately starts building the argument for why that's dangerous, stay with me. Because this response is not what it looks like on the surface. It is not agreement. It is not capitulation. It is not you abandoning your position under pressure. It is something the Stoics considered the highest expression of rational virtue, the willingness to be changed by a conversation. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, reportedly held that a philosopher who enters a debate hoping to win rather than hoping to learn has already failed, philosophically. Regardless of what happens in the debate, regardless of who walks away looking victorious, because winning an argument and arriving at truth are not the same thing, and the Stoic cares only about the second. You might be right is powerful for a reason that has nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the nature of truth itself. When you say it genuinely, calmly, without agenda, without the subtext of someone waiting to prove you wrong, model something the Stoics called eunoia, goodwill, the sincere desire for the other person's thinking to illuminate something real, and people feel the difference between that and performance instantly, even when they can't articulate what they're feeling. A genuine "you might be right" creates safety in a conversation. It signals that you are not a threat, that your goal is not to defeat them, but to understand them. And paradoxically, that safety is what makes the other person most likely to actually hear you when you eventually do push back. Because here's what happens when every exchange feels like combat. People stop listening, they start defending. Every word you say gets filtered through the question, is this an attack I need to neutralize? But when you create safety, when you demonstrate through your own openness that this conversation is not a battle, the defenses lower. And a person whose defenses are lowered is someone you can actually reach. Seneca wrote, "The first step in becoming good is to want to be good." The parallel in dialogue is this. The first step in having a real conversation is to want to be changed by it. If you enter every exchange already decided, already knowing what you think, already certain of your conclusion, you are not conversing. You are performing. And the Stoics had no patience for performance dressed as philosophy. And here's something I want you to sit with honestly. Think about the last time someone genuinely changed your mind. Not forced it, changed it. What made you open to it? I'll wager it wasn't the force of their argument. It wasn't the volume of their certainty. It wasn't the number of facts they marshaled in their favor. It was the feeling that they respected you enough to want you to understand. That they weren't trying to defeat you. They were trying to reach you. You might be right is how you give someone that feeling, even in the hardest conversations, even when you strongly believe they are wrong, even when every instinct is pushing you toward combat. You hold their position open as a live possibility rather than a threat. Not because you've surrendered your own position, but because you've decided that truth matters more than winning. And that decision, made consistently, practiced daily, changes the quality of every relationship in your life. Because people don't remember the arguments you won, they remember how they felt talking to you. And a person who makes others feel genuinely heard, genuinely considered, is someone people seek out, trust, open up to. Not because they agreed with everything, but because they made space for the possibility that they might. Next, the response that is almost never spoken aloud, the one that lives in the half second before you open your mouth, and why mastering that half second is worth more than mastering all the other 6 responses combined. This one is different from the other 6, because most of the time you never say it out loud. It lives in the half second before your mouth opens, the fraction of time between what someone just said and what you're about to do with it. That half second is where your entire life is decided, one exchange at a time. Here's the scenario I want you to sit with. A colleague dismisses your work in front of others, your face flushes, your heart rate climbs, every instinct fires simultaneously. Defend yourself, explain, push back, make them look wrong, restore what just got taken from you in front of an audience. That cascade happens in under 2 seconds, and if you follow it, if you let those instincts drive, you will say something you cannot take back, something that feels justified in the moment and costs you for weeks afterward. Epictetus called the faculty of choice proheresis. He considered it the very essence of human freedom. The one thing, the only thing that can never be taken from you regardless of circumstance. Everything else, your reputation, other people's opinions, even your physical safety, he placed in the category of ektos, external things, things not ultimately yours to control. This doesn't require my reaction is an act of proheresis. It is you exercising the one freedom nobody can ever reach, the choice of what deserves your energy. And here's the Stoic insight that makes this so much more than restraint. Not every obstacle is meant to be fought. Some obstacles are tests, specifically designed by circumstance, to see whether you can recognize them as not your battle, not your weight, not your problem. The person who attacks you publicly in a meeting, what do they actually want? Your visible reaction, your defensiveness. The proof, delivered in front of everyone, that their words found something worth defending. Your reaction is their reward. Withhold the reward, and the attack accomplishes nothing. But I need to be precise here because this response is the most misunderstood of all 7. This is not passivity. This is not avoidance. This is not the behavior of someone who has nothing to say or lacks the courage to say it. This is strategy elevated to philosophy. The conscious, deliberate decision to play the longer game, to ask not, what is the best outcome I can achieve in the next 60 seconds, but what is the best outcome I can achieve in the next 60 days? Those two answers are almost always different, and the Stoic consistently, without exception, chooses the longer view. Marcus Aurelius dealt with senators who baited him publicly, generals who tested his composure in front of armies, philosophers who challenged him in open forums specifically designed to make him look weak if he couldn't respond brilliantly in real time. And the historical accounts show the same pattern again and again. Marcus paused, evaluated, and frequently chose not to engage at all. Not because he had nothing to say, because he had already asked the question that changes everything. What does responding actually accomplish here? When the answer is nothing that serves my actual goals, the Stoic response is silence, stillness, the particular calm of someone who has looked at what just happened and found it insufficient to disturb them. That calm is not performed. It cannot be faked at a high level. It comes from genuine philosophical conviction, from having practiced repeatedly, deliberately, the recognition that most provocations are not about you. They are about the person provoking, their insecurity, their need for reaction, their attempt to manage their own discomfort by creating discomfort in you. Once you see that clearly, once you truly internalize that most attacks are not personal, but structural, not about your actual worth, but about the attacker's unmet needs, the urgency to respond evaporates. Not because you don't care, but because you care about the right things. Your character, your long-term relationships, your actual goals, the person you're becoming through how you handle the difficult moments. Those things are not served by a sharp comeback delivered in the heat of a moment. They are served by the quiet, disciplined choice to withhold your reaction when withholding it is the wisest move available. Here's your practice. This week, find one situation where your instinct is to react immediately and emotionally. One moment where the old pattern says respond, defend, push back, and instead ask the question. Does this require my reaction, or does this require my presence? Let the answer guide what comes next. Because the person who masters that question, who can sit in the discomfort of a provocation without immediately discharging it, has access to a kind of power that no verbal skill can match. The power of someone who cannot be baited, cannot be managed, cannot be predicted. Next, the hardest response of all 7, the one that requires the deepest philosophical grounding to mean. the one that will tell you more about where you actually are in your Stoic practice than anything else we've covered. This is the hardest one, not because it requires the most words, it's only 5, not because it demands the most sophisticated thinking in the moment, but because it requires something most people spend their entire lives actively avoiding: the genuine willingness to be improved by someone who is making you uncomfortable. Let me tell you what this response asks of you, because I want to be completely honest about the difficulty before we talk about the power. Someone criticizes you, maybe publicly, maybe harshly, maybe with less kindness than the feedback deserved, maybe with an agenda you can see clearly, maybe from a place of their own unresolved issues that have very little to do with you. And your every instinct says, dismiss it, defend against it. Find the flaw in their reasoning that lets you discard the whole thing without having to sit with any of it. That instinct is human, it is understandable, and it is, the Stoics would tell you directly, one of the most reliable signs of a person who has stopped growing. Marcus Aurelius, in the opening section of Meditations, the part where he lists every person who shaped him, does something remarkable. He doesn't thank the people who made his life easy. He thanks the people who made him better. His philosophy teacher, for showing him that his character needed improvement and discipline. His adoptive grandfather, for teaching him gentleness in the face of difficulty. A man named Sextus, for modeling what it looks like to live in alignment with your own values, regardless of external pressure. None of those people were comfortable influences. All of them required something from him, and he was grateful, genuinely, permanently. The Stoics practiced a discipline called amor fati, the love of fate, the embrace of what happens rather than the resistance to it. Thank you for telling me is amor fati in conversation. It is the recognition that critical feedback, unwelcome truth, even hostile criticism delivered without grace, contains somewhere inside it information you cannot get any other way. Data about how you're perceived, about what you might be missing, about the gap between your self-image and the image you actually project into the world. And that data, uncomfortable as it is to receive, is extraordinarily valuable if you're willing to evaluate it with reason rather than dismiss it with ego. Here's the distinction the Stoics were careful to make, because this response is not about accepting every criticism as valid. Epictetus was clear. You evaluate feedback with reason. You examine it honestly. You extract what's true and discard what isn't. But, and this is the crucial point, the impulse to dismiss feedback entirely, to protect yourself from it reflexively, to react with hostility to anyone who offers it. That impulse is not discernment. That is ego masquerading as discernment. And the difference between those two things determines whether you're growing or just accumulating years. Think about the people in your life who have never, not once, genuinely considered that a criticism of them might be valid. How did they turn out? Now think about the people you most respect. The ones whose judgment you trust. The ones who seem to get clearer and stronger and more themselves as the years pass. I'll wager they share one quality that has nothing to do with intelligence or talent or circumstance. They can hear hard things without being destroyed by them. They can separate the delivery of feedback from its content, the manner of the person giving it from the potential value of what they're giving. They can hold criticism in their hands, examine it honestly, take what's useful, and set down the rest, without drama, without days of rumination, without the need to punish the person who dared to suggest they were imperfect. That capacity, that specific, rare, enormously valuable capacity, is what thank you for telling me builds over time. Not in one conversation, not through saying the words once and feeling virtuous about it. Through practice, through the daily, difficult, genuinely demanding discipline of staying open when everything in you wants to close. Seneca wrote, "Gather and save the thoughts which may help you in time of emergency. Every piece of honest feedback you receive, even the brutal ones, even the unfair ones, even the ones delivered with cruelty, contains somewhere inside it a thought worth saving, if you're willing to look for it." Here's what changes when you practice this response consistently. People start telling you the truth, not the comfortable version, the actual truth, because they've learned through experience with you that you can receive it without punishing the messenger, without becoming defensive, without turning their honesty into a reason to distance yourself from them. And access to the truth, the actual truth about how you're perceived, what you're missing, where your blind spots live, is one of the rarest and most valuable things a person can have. Most people never get it because they've trained everyone around them to withhold it. You don't have to be that person. Thank you for telling me, said genuinely without performance, without the subtext of someone who is secretly cataloguing grievances, is an invitation to honesty, to real conversation, to the kind of relationship where both people actually grow. That is the deepest Stoic discipline. Not the control of external circumstances, not the silencing of opponents, the cultivation of a self so grounded, so secure, so genuinely committed to growth, that even the hardest feedback becomes something you can receive with gratitude. Not because it doesn't sting, it might. Not because it's always fair, it won't be. But because you've decided, philosophically, permanently, that becoming better matters more than being comfortable. And a person who has made that decision, truly made it, not just stated it, cannot be silenced by criticism, cannot be destabilized by attack, cannot be diminished by someone else's opinion of them, because they've already given themselves the most important thing anyone can give: the willingness to grow. One section left, where we bring all 7 together, and I'll show you exactly how to make these yours, not as a list you memorized, as a way of moving through the world. 7 responses, 2,000 years of philosophy, 1 outcome, a version of you that cannot be rattled by another person's words ever again. Not because you've memorized clever sentences, but because you've internalized something far more durable than any sentence. A way of relating to conflict that starts from the inside and works outward. Let me bring this full circle. We started with the image of being conquered without a sword, standing there with nothing to say while someone's words found every unguarded place inside you. That version of you operated from a single flawed assumption: that other people's words have power over you by default. They don't. They never did. The power was always something you were handing over, unconsciously, automatically, without realizing you had a choice. These 7 responses are how you take that choice back. I may be wrong. Takes back the choice to affiliate with truth over ego. Silence. Takes back the choice of what deserves your energy. That's an interesting perspective. Takes back the choice of what enters your inner world. Let me think about that. Takes back the choice to let reason lead. You might be right. Takes back the choice to stay genuinely open. This doesn't require my reaction. Takes back the choice of what battles are actually yours, and thank you for telling me. Takes back the deepest choice of all, the choice to keep growing, even when growth is uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself at the end of long days running an empire, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't writing for history, he was reminding himself daily, deliberately, of something that is genuinely easy to forget when the world is loud and the pressure is real. That the only unconquerable territory is the one inside you. Here's what I want you to do tonight. Not all 7, just one. Pick the response that felt most difficult when you heard it. The one your ego pushed back against hardest. The one that made some part of you say, "I could never actually say that and mean it." That resistance is information. It's pointing directly at the place where your growth is waiting. Try that one response once tomorrow in the most ordinary situation you can find. Not in a crisis, not in the highest stakes conversation of your life, just once in a regular moment with genuine intention, and come back and tell me what happened. Because philosophy was never meant to stay in books. It was meant to be lived, tested, refined through actual contact with actual difficulty. That's what the Stoics understood that most self-help has forgotten. Wisdom isn't something you acquire. It's something you practice every single day, in every ordinary moment that most people dismiss as too small to matter. Those moments are everything. They are where character is actually built. You are not your worst moment under pressure. You are not the version of yourself that said the wrong thing and spent 3 days managing the fallout. You are the version that is choosing, right now, today, to respond differently. That choice is yours. It has always been yours. Now you have 7 ways to make it.